Now, it's almost 2 months since the Grenfell fire, but many of those who survived are still living in temporary accommodation, both out of choice because of a dire shortage of social housing in Kensington. There is one development where many of the former Grenfell residents are due to be rehoused. But Channel 4 News has obtained data from Transparency International about who owns many of the properties there, and our analysis shows how many of the properties are owned by members of the global elite, which critics say is a key factor in London's housing crisis. Paul McNamara reports.
2 months ago, at least 350 people called Grenfell Tower home. Today, most that survived are still living in temporary accommodation, in a borough with more homes per square mile than almost anywhere in the country, yet a dire shortage of social housing for its poorest. Now, with so many in need of a home, one solution has emerged from an unlikely source.
Kensington's one of the most prestigious areas in London to live.
This is a promotional video almost a swish of the luxury flats it's designed to sell. This development is just over a mile from Grenfell. For dozens of the families who used to live in Grenfell Tower, this brand new brick building behind me will be the solution. It was bought in June by the authorities, a response to the chronic lack of available homes in the borough for survivors. But who will their neighbours be in the rest of this £2 billion development? And does it even matter? Well, this programme has obtained exclusive ownership data, and our analysis provides a stark insight into why this borough has a housing crisis. Indeed, why the purchase of that block was necessary at all. So is this a typical development now?
I wish I could say no, but yeah, it is.
This is Rachel Davies-Tecker from Transparency International, who have analysed the deeds of more than 150 homes sold in this development.
Yeah, it is.
So who's buying these? Is this wealthy Londoners, or is this international money that's flowing in?
We've actually found that often a very small percentage of these homes are actually bought by UK-based buyers. Developers are probably marketing and actually aiming these properties at overseas investors rather than ordinary Londoners, ordinary UK-based people who actually need homes to live in.
Almost half the properties we have data for were bought by buyers who provided such little detail we can't even verify where in the world they're from. Fewer than 1 in 10 owners is a UK resident or British company, and nearly half the buyers are registered overseas, either wealthy individuals or through companies, some of them offshore. Remarkably, more were bought through companies in just one tax haven, the British Virgin Islands, than by UK purchasers. We may not know who all the buyers are, but we know a bit about the tastes of who the developers are appealing to. These flats are just a short drive in your supercar from Harrods, Knightsbridge, and any designer label the global elite could wish for. It's a magnet for the super rich. And the super rich have come. Among those named in this bundle of title deeds for those flats are an Egyptian property tycoon, a former director of a Nigerian bank, and at least 2 Middle Eastern sheikhs. A few years back, this was a grey no-man's land of West London, some ominous-looking office blocks and a DIY store. That was before the Warwick Road Regeneration Master Plan, a sprawling new complex with a school, hundreds of high-end homes and 4 affordable housing blocks. But note, no social housing, for a council that last year had just 433 properties to let. After the Grenfell tragedy, the City of London Corporation bought 68 flats to house some of the families made homeless. They were reportedly sold at cost, making no profit. The developer, St Edward, completed the block last week, months ahead of schedule after employing extra staff. And much needed too. In 2014, 8,000 families were on the housing waiting list. But as there were so few homes, the council cut it back to around 2,700, leaving, it said, only those families most in need on the list. Moira Samuels is a local resident, a teacher and Grenfell campaigner. For her, it does matter who the neighbours are. Her concern is that this development illustrates a much wider problem, that the council approves too many developments which are aimed at the wealthiest buyers in the world, when in their place, they could be building a greater number of homes being sold for far lower prices.
These properties are so expensive that not even, I think, the local rich can afford them. And I think it will end up killing the whole spirit of this borough.
For as long as Moira has lived in the borough, Henry Pryor has been buying and selling property here. There are benefits to foreign investment, he says, but also believes the UK housing system needs an overhaul.
It would be terribly easy to label and in some ways to vilify those who've come from overseas who've been attracted for the same reasons that domestic buyers have been for so long. They have been sold property freely by people who've been quite happy to take their money in order to persuade them to move out perhaps to the country instead. If the government and politicians in general have been guilty of one thing, it's not that they haven't necessarily been building enough houses, which most people now agree they haven't been doing, it's what they've been building.
Today, the developer St Edward told us
new developments provide affordable housing, jobs and amenities. At this development, a new primary school for 210 pupils has already been delivered. St Edward markets all its developments firstly to UK buyers. A great deal of work was done to get the new homes ready as quickly as possible to meet the need in these tragic circumstances.
We asked Kensington and Chelsea Council for an interview. They declined. We asked if they thought their planning procedures favoured the world's wealthiest or their actual residents. They didn't respond to that point. But they told us they are committed to helping the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire, and the council has secured 105 flats so far. They say they are committed to building or buying 400 social housing units over the next 5 years and are working with central government to secure a deal for North Kensington, which will allow them the freedom to use money from the right to buy sales. It's a start, but in a borough where even high priority cases can wait 5 years to be housed, is it really enough to fulfil the needs of all residents who need a permanent place to call home?
Well, I'm joined now by Henry Pryor, who's a buying agent for the rich and famous, who you saw in that piece, the housing campaigner Pilgrim Tucker, and from Romford, the Conservative London Assembly member Shaun Bailey. Pilgrim Tucker, let's begin with you. That piece laid out the problem very clearly. There's a massive shortage of social housing, and new housing that does get built is often too expensive for ordinary people to afford it. So what do you want to change?
Well, I think we should be building houses that ordinary people can live in and people who do normal jobs can live in. Obviously, we don't have enough supply of those. And we should stop building basically what are investment properties for the world's billionaires. It's all very well to say they've made an ordinary purchase, but they haven't made an ordinary purchase. A lot of that money is, as we know from Transparency International, a lot of that money is potentially corrupt money. A lot of it is coming from tax havens that's been invested in those properties. We need homes to be built for ordinary people, and historically the best way of doing that has been by allowing councils to build.
So how would you actually restrict foreign ownership of British property?
Well, I think, first of all, they should be doing in Kensington and Chelsea right now is looking at disincentives to leave properties empty. I think many countries are using mechanisms by which we can limit or shape what type of foreign investment in property they get into those countries. And so I think you'd have to look at it as a whole picture. But there are definitely mechanisms that you can use to affect the situation there and increase the supply of genuinely affordable homes for ordinary people.
Henry Pryor, I mean, we have to make absolutely clear that certainly with regards to this, this development, there is absolutely no evidence of corruption or corrupt money involved in any of the sales of any of the property involved. But what would the effect be of restricting foreign investment in the British property market?
Well, it would entirely depend upon how that mechanism was to evolve. There's an extremely good full-fact Channel 4 website that gives a breakdown of exactly what the challenges would be, and indeed what the threats to the UK housing market is posed by overseas money. But
would it bring prices down, basically? If you took out the richest people from abroad buying property here, it would take out some of the demand in the market. Wouldn't it drop prices?
It's highly unlikely to have any impact on prices whatsoever.
I have to disagree with you there, Henry. Recent research from the CEPR has shown a direct correlation between foreign investment into our property market and increasing house prices. Of course, there is a relationship between demand and prices.
Henry?
Well, tragically, as we know, we're in the midst of a national as well as a capital housing crisis. If building more homes was the answer, I think even if we built 1 million inside the M25, it wouldn't have any effect on prices per se. What we need to now do is actually concentrate on what we build, and instead of those who are already on the housing ladder reaching down and pulling it up behind them, what we're trying to do now is to make sure that we build homes for people who traditionally haven't been able to afford new homes.
Shaun Bailey, there is a growing demand, isn't there, to do something about foreign ownership of British property. You know, there have been certain high-profile developments where it's all gone to foreign investors you know, rather than local people. Are you straightforwardly against any changes or any interventions into the market?
I don't think that's a challenge in London. London faces such a serious challenge. Actually, it's about supply and where we're going to put people. You know, estate regeneration has made a lot of residents feel like they're having their housing removed. Southwark and Camden have had massive problems with this. The bottom line is the government have given the mayor over £3 billion to address this, and that's what needs to be done. We need to be more creative about where we build and how we build, and we need to build in really big numbers. And remember, the foreign investment end, these really rich buyers, I'm not sure that if you restricted them, it would free up lots of land for people who are on ordinary incomes. I think we have to do something new with the land we have now and look for new land to build on. And we're going to have a real push because there's a tension there. London is open. We think our population is going to 10 million. It's going to make London even more expensive regardless of outside investment. And we need to answer those challenges first.
You talk about building new property, but there's a basic challenge for a council like Kensington and Chelsea, isn't there? That it's got to find somewhere to build. You know, it's a pretty overcrowded place. So it has a choice, doesn't it, when it comes to development? Does it release land to private developers to build rich flats, or does it build social housing?
Actually, Kensington Chelsea doesn't have a choice. I live there. I was born there, sorry. It's a tiny place. You said in your VT how densely populated it is. It's a microcosm. If you look at Southwark, they've had their own problems with trying to regenerate estates. Now, they've changed an estate that used to provide over 1,000 social rent, and now it's gone down to 82 because they're trying desperately to do something there, and residents have fought back. The issue there is this. How do we expand the supply of houses and also lower the prices? I personally favour rent to buy. Remember, we have to give people from across the social spectrum who are Londoners already a number of ways to live, a number of places to live, right from social rents right up to people who can pay market price. But at this point, focusing on Kensington and Chelsea is actually not helping the situation. We need to look at London as a whole. And in a place like Romford, for instance, there may be room, but you have to ask those local residents, do they want to give up the space they have? We need to find a way of rewarding communities that take on this new housing, because, like I say again, our population is rising and this problem will only increase unless we can answer it permanently.
Well, we're looking at Britain rather than even just London. Pilgrim Tucker, I mean, what do you make of that?
There is a point behind what he's saying, which is we really should be investing in industry outside London and not making the movement of London to people quite so huge by making other cities around the rest of the country, particularly in the north of England, more attractive. But as I said before, the most sustainable, effective form of housing and our housing supply was at its most healthy point when councils were allowed to borrow and build secure homes that were genuinely affordable, that people knew they could rely on through thick or thin, and they also created genuinely mixed communities once upon a time, before the Conservative government started bringing through all sorts of legislation, which has led to the housing crisis.
Sorry, not Henry.
Hold on.
I mean, you mentioned in the piece, you know, the extent to which foreign people are being blamed, and there's a sense that foreign people of all kinds, rich and poor, get blamed for Britain's housing crisis.
As they do in so many things, embarrassingly, if there's one tiny positive from the tragedy of Grenfell, it is that now residents in Kensington and Chelsea now have had their conscience pricked, and perhaps all of us in London will now start to look at what the available and sustainable alternatives might be. That's the challenge that politicians have. That's what we're going to measure them by.
We must leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed.